I would like to introduce Takashi Nagaoka for joining us, and thank you very much for hosting this conference, I know virtually, but for initiating the forum this time around, and for, as Paulina says, running it so smoothly as you always do in the JFSA. It's always very impressive. Over to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for a kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon and good evening. It is my honor to have the chance to speak to you all today at the EU-Asia Financial Services Dialogue. And I'd like to thank ASIFMA for inviting me here. I recall the ASIFMA annual meeting almost 2.5 years ago when the event was held in Tokyo. And actually, it was one of the meetings held over a few days, including IOSCO's Asia Pacific Regional Committee meeting and a high-level dialogue among regulators from the EU and Asia Pacific. And we had the pleasure of welcoming fellow regulators and market participants from the two regions and around the world to meet in Tokyo. Due to the COVID-19, we had not been able to meet in person for more than 2 years. But looking at the bright side, we have adapted to the new environment and are now taking advantage of virtual meetings to exchange views in a flexible and timely manner. Of course, I would have liked to meet in person over tasty local dishes, but I'll leave it for the next time. And before I start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting in a very difficult time. I do not intend to spend a lot on what is going on in Ukraine, but I would like to express that our hearts are with those who are suffering from the current devastating situation. This grossly unnerving turn of events abruptly emerged just as the world was about to find its way to the path to recovery from the pandemic. So far, the direct impact of the event and the sanctions seems to be rather limited in various markets, which is quite fortunate, I should say. But given the added level of uncertainty, it is essential that we, both the regulators and market participants, carefully monitor developments in the market. Therefore, dialogues involving all the parties from different parts of the world, like the one we have today, will be increasingly important. Now, back to the main subject. Today, as the chair of IOSCO's Asia Pacific Regional Committee, or APRC in short, I would like to speak a little bit about the discussions and initiatives at the APRC with the focus on digital assets and sustainable finance, which I believe are of great interest for many of you. As you may know, APRC is one of the IOSCO's 4 regional committees and plays an important role where securities regulators in the region meet regularly to exchange views and discuss policy issues, which in turn form the basis for inputs to wider IOSCO, as well as share developments at the IOSCO level and disseminate them in the region. We also place great importance on inputs from the industry. For example, we regularly meet with ASIFMA, and in particular, we found a report on market fragmentation in 2020, as well as the views shared during the past 2 meetings, highly informative. At the IOSCO board level last year, the APRC submitted its observations and suggestions reflecting these inputs as appropriate, and now they are in the hands of IOSCO's relevant groups. Both digital assets and sustainable finance have been under the spotlight for some time already, but the recent developments in relevant markets and international discussion makes them all the more important for APRC member regulators, as well as regulators and market participants around the world. And I would stress that both areas require us regulators to carefully listen to the players in the market, as well as work ever more closely with peer regulators. Then first, let me speak about digital assets. For the avoidance of doubt, I will be using the terms digital assets and crypto assets rather interchangeably. As you're aware, the size of crypto assets, including stablecoins and DeFi markets, have grown rapidly in the recent years. They're increasingly attracting institutional investors, and the correlation with traditional financial assets is also strengthening. Against such backdrop, discussions are underway in the international arena on the appropriate approaches for stablecoins, in particular those with possible global reach like DM, in the context of financial stability and money laundering. Discussions for investor protection and enforcement have been started as well. A number of jurisdictions have already introduced or made proposals on regulations governing crypto assets, including stablecoins, but it does not mean that they're complete. For example, Japan has been one of the front runners in introducing registration regime for the crypto asset service providers and has brought ICO and crypto asset derivatives trading under its securities laws. But these measures are aimed at responding to anti-money laundering and investor protection needs while allowing healthy innovation in the field. But now, in response to the evolving situation, we are planning to amend the law once again to further ensure that we follow the grand principle of same business, same risk, same rules. The journey will continue. Other APRC member jurisdictions are also taking steps. There are some where regulations have been introduced and implemented already, while proposals are being made in some others. I understand that new regulations are being considered in Europe as well, as Paulina has referred to. Now, such developments may give rise to a concern. If jurisdictions take different approaches to the definition of crypto assets and regulation of intermediaries, we can introduce a risk of market fragmentation easily. We should also expect that the ambiguity of the scope of the regulation and the law barriers to cross-border activities would introduce huge challenges for enforcement and increased risks of regulatory arbitrage. APRC members are rightly concerned about this risk of fragmentation. APRC has been taking up this issue at the past few meetings to learn from each other. At the most recent meeting last week, we had a discussion focusing on what contributions APRC can make to international debate. APRC is also discussing enforcement issues at different levels. The challenges identified include those related to, for example, provision of crypto asset services by entities without domestic presence, and retail investors seemingly happy-go-lucky investments in crypto assets. Issues surrounding crypto assets also emerge in the context of exchange of information under IOSCO's MMOU. The MMOU monitoring group, on which I also chair, is currently discussing how to ensure smooth exchange of information with regard to crypto asset service providers among the signatories. In addition to the cooperation within the region, we have regular dialogues with our fellow counterparts in Europe. And since 2016, regulators from the two regions regularly meet at the EU Asia Pacific Forum. And at the most recent meeting, actually held last Friday, this theme was taken up as one of the pillar topics. Crypto assets, as you know, are not bound by the existing financial framework per se, which is both its strength and weakness. And securities regulators will continue to think about appropriate ways and measures to regulate, supervise, and enforce these new types of financial assets and trading, in close cooperation with other domestic relevant authorities as well as international peers. Now, let me turn to sustainable finance. Sustainable finance is obviously one of the hottest issues together with digital assets, both internationally and domestically. And while the issue of sustainable finance encompasses a broad range of topics, one of the most imminent topics has to do with disclosure of information. And in this area, against the concerns often cited as alphabet soup of different standards, it is crucial that there will be a consistent and comparable set of reporting standards, which takes into account both the usefulness to investors and the burden for the companies. In this context, IOSCO welcomes the establishment of International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, under the IFRS Foundation last November. and the initiative to develop a global baseline for sustainability disclosure standards. But learning from the history of that global adoption of IFRS, in order for the ISSB standards to become a truly global baseline, it will be critically important that it obtains endorsement by IOSCO. And IOSCO will rigorously look into the proposed standards once they are released. From the APRC point of view, we are working in parallel with initiatives at the entire IOSCO level to contribute to the IOSCO work by sharing the voices from the region. In addition, sustainable finance is one of the biggest themes at the regular dialogue with the industry as well. At the last meeting with ASIFMA, such subtopics as taxonomy, disclosure, carbon market, and ESG ratings were pointed out from the ASIFMA side. APRC members expressed their expectations for the effectiveness and further developments with regard to ASEAN taxonomy and common ground taxonomy by IPSF, or International Platform on Sustainable Finance. The issue was taken up at the EU Asia Pacific Forum as one of the pillar topics as well. Now, as the ISSB is working intensively to develop its new standards, jurisdictions in Asia Pacific are starting to develop their own standards reflecting respective situations. In Europe, EFRAG is working on the standards in line with the CSRD provisions. Such developments flag a strong need to address the risk of fragmentation. If the scope and depth of taxonomies and disclosure rules differ by jurisdiction, companies and financial institutions operating globally will likely find themselves in a position where complying with the regulation in one jurisdiction would mean violating that in another. And investors will also face difficulty in appropriately comparing and assessing what they invest in. While approaches and stages differ among jurisdictions, we all are heading towards the common goal to have a sustainable society. So in order to achieve this ultimate objective, all stakeholders need to take it as their own issue and work in a harmonized manner. We are now at a crucial juncture. We need to seriously consider what can be done to mitigate the harmful impact of the potential risk of fragmentation in this area by involving diversity of stakeholders at all levels. So that was a very brief overview of the discussions and activities at APRC regarding two big topics of digital assets and sustainable finance. Both are challenges common to all of us, increasing in their significance, especially in recent years as technology, market, and society evolve. They now call for focused efforts to address the fragmentation risk and cooperation among regulators and market participants. In order to respond to such needs, in addition to promoting trust among the region, we need to build and maintain the same kind of trusting relationship with EU counterparts and others, and engage in a substantive dialogue on a continual basis. To this point, I believe that since the fragmentation was added to the list of priority topics under Japan's G20 presidency in 2019, we have seen highly constructive dialogue, also in the context of IOSCO. In addition to visible outputs like the reports on good practices on deference determination and supervisory colleges, ongoing discussion on the risk of fragmentation between different regions is getting increasingly active. However, the two themes discussed today can be seen as phase 2 of the discussion of corporate fragmentation. In other words, it is not a matter of removing fragmentation risks in the existing financial market framework, but collectively addressing cross-sectoral fragmentation risks that are about to take shape. Now, with the developments in Ukraine, we are in an increased level of uncertainty. During the pandemic, we could all work together towards the shared goal, but the ongoing situation is not necessarily the same. Even in this situation, however, we should not stop looking at the fragmentation risks that are about to emerge. And APRC will continue to be an important platform for the securities regulators in the Asia Pacific to cooperate. We sincerely hope that we can work together with the industry as well as the fellow regulators in Europe and other regions. And with that, I would like to bring my remarks to a close. And I hope you will enjoy an informative meeting and find useful takeaways to bring back home today. Thank you very much.
Nagaoka-san, thank you very much indeed for this very interesting speech. I think there are many thoughts in it, but three things I've taken away from that as particularly interesting is the way you're proposing a very pragmatic approach to crypto assets, or however we want to define it, digital assets, in the supervisory approach. And I was very heartened when you talked about the ISSB and the importance of the ISSB in developing international standards. Yes, we will see how they will be implemented. We always know that Japan has been at the forefront of supporting the IFRS, and many Asian jurisdictions, as will Europe. We have to see where things will end up, slightly more to the west of us here in Europe. But I think finally, the point, and you're right, I think IOSCO has been at the forefront, and you and Ashley have been at the forefront in looking at fragmentation, and whether it's mutual recognition or deference or what we call equivalence in Europe, ways of recognizing each other's supervisory frameworks, which has been so difficult after the financial crisis. But that's now nearly 15 years ago. So I think we should kind of look at more supervisory trust. And I think that's what this dialogue was about and what your forum is about. So thank you very much indeed for being with us and for your chairmanship of this initiative.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.